Hello and welcome to Datum. This is season 3, episode 8. Ravi, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm doing very well. It's been a hot minute. It's been a while since we last spoke.
All American now. Yeah, it's been a while. It's been a long while. Wow. I think the last time we did a podcast, coronavirus was just
I think we're
basically
about a
kind of
month in. Yeah,
Yeah, I'd say that's just ramping up because
yeah,
typically in the UK we reacted late to everything. So a month in was basically, where we would have been right at the start, right?
yeah.
Of things locking down. And fingers crossed, now we're sort of on the other end of it. And we've seen the peak of the trough sort of get flattened.
Yeah.
And now we're on to I think the tougher bit, which is sort of eradicating the disease, which is where the science kicks in, right? We've all been talking about the science, but now is
Mhm.
now when people actually have to find a vaccine and we have to still stay safe, make sure people are safe. And a lot has changed in that time, right?
It's a bit. Yeah, there's a lot of vigilance that's come into it. But yeah, in terms of non-coronavirus related things, a lot has changed.
It has.
Um,
It has indeed.
I guess the biggest news is that me and Tim are no longer colleagues.
I know, you absolute traitor. You decided that you had enough of me, or you were either fed up of being in my shadow this whole time, so you decided to
Yeah,
go somewhere else, right?
one or the other. That consultancy line was a bit too formidable, and I was never going to catch up.
Yeah.
Um, But yeah, so I'm no longer working for the Information Lab. As of the 1st of June, I am now an employee of the City Football Group. Many of you people listening will probably know that I've been super into sports analytics. In fact, that was my route into the data and Tableau world. So yeah, this was it was one of those. I guess it's one of those things where if I didn't take the opportunity in a year's time,
Right.
it would have been a very what if situation, right? I think the situation itself and the role and the team that I'll be working in is almost a perfect storm, particularly for me.
Yeah, exactly. And I think obviously it's sad to see a good friend and colleague leave the company I work for, but at the same time, it made a lot of sense. It's hard. It was hard for me to sit there and tell you as a friend not to sort of go for it, as it were,
Yeah.
because it literally ticked all the boxes, and I knew how passionate you are about the subject as well, and you
Mhm.
haven't sort of hidden that fact. So yeah, a perfect role,
Yeah,
perfect timing, great move, I think.
yeah, exactly. So the city is a really interesting company, the City Football Group. It's fairly unique. I think the only similar sort of setup is the Red Bull franchise, and they of course go across multiple sports. Um, so the Red Bull franchise own I think 4 or 5 soccer clubs around the world. So they've got Red Bull New York, Salzburg, Leipzig, as well as the Red Bull Racing team.
Right, right.
So the City Football Group after the takeover of Manchester City. A
Hmm.
couple of years later, they started with this thing where they've started acquiring parts or whole of clubs. So currently they're up to 9. I don't think they're done. Um, there's a few. I think there's definitely a few more places around the world to take over. But the fact I'll be working with within the team of global football in a stream called Football Intelligence. Um, and my role really is to start enabling and building all these clubs on an analytical journey where we start speaking the same language and building that data culture and primarily starting around Tableau, but with a lot of scope to move elsewhere. So I think having a data and tech podcast is going to be good fun to think about the different things that it's going to apply to my world, right? So because
Absolutely.
things that you're interested in, like wearable tech, start suddenly becoming part of my day to day.
Yeah.
So that's very cool. But the first few weeks have been good. It's strange starting a new job in the same exact seat that I left my old one. Right?
Okay,
Like,
yeah, yeah, yeah. That makes sense. You're working from home, right? So
yeah, yeah, exactly.
you've started a new place while still in your pajamas and shorts. Whenever you get up, right?
Yeah, to my new employer, that is not how I started my first day.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I saw you on that day, Ravi. Don't lie to me. Don't lie to me.
yeah, no, it was very good. So yeah, it's been the first good few weeks. I think I'm getting to grips with the volume of data, but also the different challenges there are. And I think one of the
Right.
biggest challenges I'm going to face is to not be the magpie, like spotting every shiny thing in within the organization, be like, oh, I can fix that
Right.
with some data, or like, oh, I can quickly build a viz. Because really, the role is about 10% of my time being spent building things, and the rest
Yeah.
is enabling, educating, and sort of elevating the data culture and the data literacy and the language. I think the really interesting thing is building that language and lexicon about getting people to start thinking about data as part of that conversation and not
Yeah.
forcing it on them and like it's really really cool, interesting thing. And one of the things I'm excited to do is share that journey, because I really do want to share that sort of thing, because like I've spent the last 18 months in
Yep.
that customer success role, trying to enable lots of companies and saying these are the things you should do. Now it's time for me to actually do the things I was recommending clients to do. So
Yeah, you're kind of locked into one place to make that happen, right? But I think it's also liberating because I mean you're very passionate about sports. So
mhm.
when you're doing something you're passionate about, it's very easy for you to actually apply yourself and sort of see through that that sort of newfound energy, right?
Yeah.
And see it applied in something that I guess you've worked theoretically. You've also worked on it practically in lots of other sort of
Mhm.
organizations in through your consulting background. So I think you're being a bit unfair on yourself there. But yeah, I think it's going to be a great journey. I'm looking forward to seeing sort of how you progress, not just in that company in particular, but it's a
Mhm.
whole new sector that typically I think Tableau has always tried to make a big play into sports analytics, and
Right.
I've always seen it as a really tough transition because actually sports analytics is one of the areas where two things happen. There's a lot of propriety. Sorry, I can't say that word. Let me try again. There's a lot of propriety. I can't say it.
Proprietary.
It's a real tongue twister. No, I can't say it.
Just
Proprietary. Yeah,
proprietary.
proprietary sort of analytics involved. If you think of F1, for example, no two
Mhm.
teams use the same analytical system
Mhm.
to analyze essentially standard parts, right? If you look at football, or if you look at NBA or any sport, every single one of them invests in analytics as an
Mhm.
internal capability, right? Because that is an edge, and so that's going to be
Yeah.
an interesting thing to sort of see you navigate.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, like I can tell you today, there's going to be a lot of stuff that I can't talk about, right? There's going to be a lot of things that, the way that the group works and the way that my role will develop
Are
and
you
the
telling
things we
me
do.
we have a sports analytics professional on a podcast and he can't talk about his job? Oh, man.
I
What's
can
going
talk
on
about,
here?
I can
Man,
talk about
first you
parts of
leave
my
the
job.
company and now you're telling me we've got no content for the podcast for the next, I don't know how long you're there.
It's gonna be fun, right? Like I'm getting my excuses in early.
You
Um,
are, you are.
but
Don't worry, fans. I'm going to spend every episode trying to get something out of him. So yeah,
I mean,
watch your space.
you're absolutely right. Like the amount of data we have, and the proprietary metrics we have means that we're not going to share everything. But I think there is something to be said on a competitive environment,
Open
where
source.
a competitive environment of people who are using data. And I think a healthy competition is a good thing. You don't want to be the best in
Right,
every
right.
field, but so there is the education piece across the industry. And I think, as you said, Tableau has tried to get into this field quite a lot. And
Yep, yep.
I at this point in time, I can still agree that Tableau is the best tool for the things we're doing. Like it's self-serve, it's easy to use, it's relatively straightforward to get started with. The interesting thing is almost pacing and sort of making these things into bite-sized content. So that's
Right.
really cool.
Good. Good. I think it's going to be a fantastic transition. Looking forward to sort of seeing where you end up with that. It's sort of happened very quickly since our last podcast, not least because I haven't actually put the previous podcast up. So if you're listening, you're going to get a double whammy of podcasts in your podcast player of choice. I'm really looking forward to seeing sort of where you end up, seeing sort of how you develop through the role. Obviously, I'll latch onto every single public bit of information we can share on the podcast. So
Yeah.
be sure to get that. If you know Ravi, if you work in another club and you know Ravi, maybe you're a new listener because you've followed him since his recent transition, get in touch. Let me know what you'd like to find out about this guy. I will do my best behind the scenes to get some insider information. I'll
So
talk to Brian. I'll have words. Don't worry.
you're an Arsenal fan, right, Tim? Like
I am an Arsenal fan. Let's just stop
yeah.
right there. Let's move
There
on.
we go.
Yeah. What was the last score? 3-0? Yeah.
Yeah,
Let's move on.
it
Let's
wasn't
move
good.
on.
It wasn't good.
Yeah, it wasn't good.
But
Okay.
one of the other things that happened is actually just today. So we're speaking on Monday, the 22nd of June, 2020, and I think we've both just hopped onto this after watching the Apple podcast, right?
Right.
So Apple
Absolutely.
podcast, the
Apple
Apple keynote.
podcast, the Apple keynote. Yeah.
Yeah, the
Absolutely. Apple keynote. This to me is like it's like, what do you call it? It's a rite of passage. Every year, every single event, I will get on a stream. I think I sent you a screenshot of me with the live stream on the left. No, actually, I had the live stream on my iPad. On the left, I had the Verge.com homepage, like open up. And on the right, I was in a Google Meet with a friend of mine in Amsterdam, Ben, who passionately loves Apple products. He works in advertising and sort of creative agency space. And so we always have a little chat about where the technology is going. So that's like our opportunity to catch up every so often as well. We obviously catch up on other occasions, but both of us have followed Apple products for a long while. So this was a very interesting keynote, not least because Apple have announced that they're going to be moving to a new hardware infrastructure, which isn't based on Intel chips.
Yeah, exactly. They're developing their own chips in house. And I think the exciting part there is because of that, there's no that they're creating the entire ecosystem of hardware around that, which is really exciting purely for the integration perspective on the software and hardware they develop, right? So there'll be almost, because everything's in house, you start to expect that things start to connect better, that there's faster performance, that transitions between applications, particularly native ones, become easier and more fluid. And go on.
I was going to say the big winner there is a big announcement on The Verge already is that because they're transitioning to ARM, all those apps on iOS and iPad will just run natively. So you won't need to do any of the sort of weird things they're doing today with Catalyst. You'll just be able to just deploy them. And hence they've changed the interface to look a little bit more like an iPad and iOS, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah. I was going to say, like, Mac OS is slowly sort of merging and turning into this whole one thing, which is iPad OS and iPhone OS, right? It's not it's not a big standalone point and click here, almost stepping towards a 2-in-1 MacBook feel, like we're going to get a touchscreen MacBook soon that it feels like, or something similar. But let's see.
I really hope we do get to that. If they go in this direction and it makes it easy for me to pick up my iPad, fire up Tableau, and then sit down, open my laptop, and just carry on as I am, then what this actually means is that I won't need my laptop because my iPad should have all the same capability as
if not more.
My MacBook, if not more, than my MacBook. If my MacBook is on an ARM chip, and so is my iPad, why do I need my laptop?
Yeah, right, exactly.
So that to me is the real sort of deal clincher here. If they're transitioning everything to ARM, what's the need of what's the need of a laptop as we know it? If you have an iPad device, you'd understand what I'm talking about here. So yeah, very interesting time. But I think it's really interesting how Tim Cook opened the event, right?
Yeah, no, I think the event itself was purely virtual. Apple were one of the first to say, there won't be a WWDC this year. We're going to go purely virtual. Everyone stay home at the very very early point of the COVID-19 pandemic. But Tim Cook I think it was almost the most charismatic I've seen him, probably because of the whole, like, it's pre-scripted and pre-recorded. The transitions were great. I recommend watching them because Apple did a very good virtual event. But I think what Tim Cook opened with was a very powerful statement about the Black Lives Matter movement, and I think we addressed it really well, right?
Yeah, I think so. I missed bits of it, but I think Tim Cook, even during the when the issues were going on, I think he himself is gay, and so he's openly talked about the challenge that people like him face in society and have faced in the past. And he's talked about it in commencement speeches, graduation speeches for those of us in the UK. And he's also talked about how Apple takes a stance on that particular issue and actively tries to sort of handle it.
And exactly. And I think both of us are people of color, part of the BAME group, and it's really good for I guess for me, and I guess I speak for you as well, to see people like that speaking openly about it, and that they are still learning, that there are still things that they can and will do better on, because this isn't something you just fix overnight, and it's not something that is just a product of someone was calling this time protest season. Last year there was the global warming protest, and this is well, there's something very wrong, and if these things are continually brought up, then maybe it should be time for some actual change and some action being taken.
Yeah, it's more than just a season, right? It's there's a lot going on. I think it will probably it's probably worth going into sort of the Black Lives Matter issue in a little bit more depth, because I think there's a couple of angles. I think I got really frustrated over a couple of different sort of angles. I have to be careful how I word this, because I did a video, obviously. If you haven't had a chance, I'll put a link in the show notes. I'm not saying you have to go watch this video. I'm just saying this is where I spent half an hour sharing my views on the particular matter. And I have to say, Ravi, I got some really interesting responses, to say the least. Broadly speaking, a lot of people were very sort of interested to hear my opinion.
Yeah.
I have to say, I led with the fact that this video was shared in the context of an internal organization. So I shared this video internally to prompt discussion in the Information Lab. And it actually did exactly that. We got a lot
Yeah.
of good discussion out of it. My boss, Tom Brown, he actually posted a blog post with the Information Lab sort of stance on the issue, openly saying where we can improve, where we can do better, where our current sort of diversity sits. We focus as a company a lot on gender diversity, and I think what we haven't done in that process is just generally focus on diversity altogether. And so the first step of that has been about sort of collecting the metrics so we can more clearly understand whether or not we are doing a bad job, because we can't practically say we are doing a bad job, and I don't personally think we are. We also can't say that we're not doing a bad job because we don't have the data to prove it. So collecting the data is obviously one really important step. Hearing the views of people in the company is another. We've had sort of open forums where we've had opportunity to talk directly to the leaders of our company in sort of very useful settings. Normally these things are done in sort of town halls, but we've actually had them in groups of 6, and that means you can have meaningful discussions, right? Because they're much smaller groups. It's actual people talking to each other, and you get a lot more sort of context out of that. And we've had several of those sessions that have been captured in sort of in various forms. And as I said in my video, these things take time. We can be activists today, but over time, it's going to take time to see the results of that, because there's a couple of things. Obviously, you can move quickly, and activism generally does promote that. That's why we've seen statues here in the UK going down and elsewhere in the world sort of getting defaced, because that's something you can do immediately. But when you need to change something like this at a not just a cultural level, but societal level and also organizational level, and it's an issue that's not typically well understood, leave alone well monitored, then you have to sort of do things in a structured way. And I'm not saying that doesn't mean it shouldn't be done quickly. It's just an acceptance that we have to sort of allow a bit of time for people to sort of react and digest. And people like myself are taking their time to share views. So you also have to allow space for that, right?
Right.
For
No,
that
exactly.
to be considered, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's a really important point. Giving people the agency and the ability to
Yeah.
share their views. But and I think, as you said, that there is an element of this being a cultural change
Right.
and the sort of mindset. I think we spoke about this before, and between us, and I talked about, like, well, no one really says they're a racist.
Mm-hmm.
What we're really talking about is racial bias, and
Yes.
I think even if I'd even call myself out on a few of these things. Like, I think, given the environment you grew up in, and
Yeah.
the views you hold, there is an element of racial bias even in myself, and as a member of the Black and um, BAME community. So yeah, it's a slow process. I don't want to say a slow process, but it is a process.
Yeah.
And the best and most progressive way I can think about is having that open discourse and challenging and considering the things that you do normally. I think I liken this to, in some ways, to the feminist movement and people that are looking towards gender equality and
Yeah.
equality of all genders,
Yeah.
as well as LGBTQ. Um, because a lot of these things are fundamentally stigmas and things that have been attached over time through many historical points and things that have happened to people and the sort of stereotypes that built over time.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
all of these things, the things we can do is just continue to correct and inform people about things that they might not be aware of, right? For example, the
Exactly. Yeah.
one example that I call out quite a lot is in the US. They often heralded in the 80s and 90s the South Asian community. So my community, the people, I'm of Indian descent, they went
Mm-hmm.
over to North America, and it was a case of, well, the people who are in the Black community aren't integrated as well as these South Asians. So, well, consider how these people were brought over, right? Like the black people were a product of the slave trade, whereas South Asians had a very strict, controlled immigration based on high level of entry, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you're being very selective in the people that are arriving in the country. So that level of selection means that there is an inherent level of bias, and I think
Yeah.
that
There's
that
bias
that
built into that.
bias, yeah, exactly, and that bias gets built on and passed down through generations. So
Yeah.
it's a very strong discussion to be had. I think it's a very uncomfortable decision for many discussion for many people, but that doesn't mean it's not worth having, right? Like,
Yeah. And is
inspirational comments like, the magic happens outside your comfort zone. Well, this is also a very uncomfortable place to be in,
yeah.
and for progression where we get to a point where these things I don't want to say stop mattering, but we start talking less because it becomes a case that the number of cases, the number of actions against people of a minority start to decline, hate crimes start to decline.
Yeah.
This is what you aim for, right? A level where this stops being an issue. You know, that
Hmm.
I think you've seen lots of posts being like, you know, if you're fed up hearing about racism and Black Lives Matter, imagine how the minorities feel, right? Like this is day to day for many of us.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Absolutely, and it's such an interesting sort of. I find it interesting because I feel like in the discourse there's also sort of a lot of disagreement
Absolutely.
in and amongst the BAME community about how to go about this. Right,
Hmm.
there's a lot of frustration, pent up frustration, but also built up frustration, not
Hmm.
just over the last few months because of things like
Through
COVID,
generations. Yeah.
which have disproportionately affected certain ethnic minorities,
Hmm.
but there's also sort of the reasoning and the sort of philosophy about that. Just to give some personal examples, when I sent the video out. I heard a lot of positive comments, people very grateful for sharing, some people actually agreeing with their experiences. The one thing I was very sensitive and aware of going into it is that my challenge with race and my issues with race over time are very unique to me because they're sort of things I experience. And I specifically highlighted that I knew that other people have suffered worse racism, which is why I went through sort of this really bizarre effort of sort of distinguishing between bias and direct racism. I think that's exactly what I said in the video, right?
Hmm.
And I think some people took that to mean that bias in itself wasn't racism. You know, I heard some comments from people saying, "Look, it's all racism," and
Hmm.
I fully agree. But then on the other spectrum, I got messages from people who went to the same university as mine, who flatly disagreed with my experience of university. Who said that university was their worst time they've ever had in terms of experiencing racial abuse, and those were comments about the same university I was saying I was really happy to go to because that's where
Hmm.
I found that I was able to sort of explore my own sort of identity and come out of a shell, as it were. And
Yeah.
the thing is, I didn't make that video like with sort of ignorant of that fact. I knew that, and that's why I said very specifically at the start, this is
Yeah.
my experience, and what I've gone through is mild compared to what others have gone through. And so it's been interesting to get it from both angles. I actually had quite a few sort of frustrated messages about the way I sort of recorded my video, and maybe some people didn't agree with the sentiment.
Hmm.
And I sort of said to those people, listen, this is my experience, okay? Like, this is what I went through. I think not everyone can share it publicly, I agree, and not
Yeah.
everyone has to. But I've got a duty to take some of that feedback on board and share that more widely. I'm doing that now, but I'm hopefully going to get opportunities to do that in the tablet community sort of coming forward, even though that was never a starting point. We'll come on to this in a second. I think the tablet community itself is probably another space where I could probably do a little bit more to kind of encourage the discussion and try and see what comes out of that to try and build something constructive. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the representation matters, right? Like,
Yeah.
there's been lots of, like, if you think about the, you know, if we take this out of the conversation towards something a bit different in terms of film, right? We talk about film in terms of representation of women, representation of different minorities within the film industry.
Mm-hmm.
Um, two examples I can think of at the top of my head are Black Panther and Crazy Rich Asians, two films that came out in the last 5 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
And a lot was made of the fact that, you know, these really matter because for everyone, representation has echoes in different ways. You know, Spider-Man, was it the out of the into the Spideyverse?
Yeah.
Same reason. Like, you've got representation of black superheroes, you've got representation of Asian frontline characters,
Yeah.
where it isn't pulling on racial tropes. Like, these things are progress, and I'm not saying that this is solving the problem, but it's things like this where everyone has a story and everyone has different touch points to relate to, and
Right.
that's the way you get true movement towards cultural change.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, there are things that have been taken on overnight. You know, actions to curb police brutality and the level of bias within the police community in
Yeah.
general,
Mm-hmm.
in the US in particular, but also just being aware of those biases and making sure that people are aware of and understand where these things come from. It's not about necessarily agreeing with all things, but I think
Yeah.
having those conversations and having the facts and the in our world, I guess, the data points out there and being spoken about is exactly where you want to get to.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. And I think the final sort of um, I guess it's not really a final gambit, but the final sort of perspective to this that I found really interesting is that there's an element to which I said it in the video, there's a lot of uncomfortable discussion that needs to happen. And I think too quickly, especially if it's had on things like Twitter and sort of these social platforms that reward sort of short-term, quick, power statements, right? It
Yeah.
ends up sort of going into this sort of very frictional discussion, right?
Because you can't pervade
Whereas,
tone. You can't
yeah,
pervade tone. You can't
yeah,
pervade intent,
exactly,
and you can't show that there is a level of humility and a level of I don't have the
exactly,
answers, but this is what
yeah,
I see.
yeah. And so what ends up happening is you have a really difficult conversation in a public space and a platform that's not designed for that kind of
No.
conversation. Really, the best way to have this conversation is face to face.
Mhm.
And look at the situation we're in with COVID, right? You just
It's
cannot
not.
do that. It's not. It's like the worst possible time for this kind of topic to come up. And uh, what people have to get really comfortable with, and I say this to both sides of the argument, people who want to know more about diversity and understand sort of the challenges of the BAME community, but also people from the BAME community themselves. What we have to acknowledge is that because of that, we're going to be talking on platforms and tone is going to be so hard to judge. I'm not saying we should be allowing of sort of disruptive behavior or disgusting behavior or vile statements or just, flat out ignorance that, there's always a space where someone can do a little bit of upfront research and understanding on the topic before entering the conversation cold, which, that happens a lot in these issues where people make statements like that. I saw it on Question Time BBC just the other day, poor guy, but elderly gentleman just said, I have views too. I was just like, oh no, don't say what you're about to say. It was so bad. It was so bad. And the flip side of this, listen, we have to allow people to make mistakes and then constructively tell them, listen, okay, I see your perspective. I see that. I know you may be not articulate with the way you're saying it and maybe you're struggling to piece it together because this is a conversation that isn't commonly had. Look, this is how it helps. And you can often tell immediately if someone's just being sort of confrontational or if they're actually willing to listen. Because if they're willing to listen, that conversation and the effort to say that will be very easy, actually. You'll find it'll just come naturally to you, right? And I think those are the kind of opportunities we have to go and seek rather than everyone just assuming that, it's an uncomfortable topic. Let's not say anything about it. We really do actually have to go and find the uncomfortable discussions and find a platform. If it's not face to face, we have to create those platforms. This is a time to be creating those platforms, right?
And I think there's also the messaging element to that as well, right?
Yeah, exactly.
There's an element of what is the best medium of messaging. And I think there is no one right answer. Right? Every company, every person, every community, every organization has their own different ways of communicating that message, and it might come in different shapes and sizes at different times, right? You don't need to be the loudest.
Yeah.
Be the loudest person at the start of the table, right? So
we need to give people opportunities to talk in a safe place. And another sort of point I made is there's an element of context. I made this in the video again. We have to understand the context of the scenario. I think one interesting example I gave was in the UK. I made a statement that black and minority ethnic individuals aren't discriminated by COVID-19, and what I explicitly meant in that comment is that, listen, COVID-19, if you get it, doesn't discriminate on the color of your skin. If you get it and you have, you're in one of these sort of groups that's supposed to be staying safe, you have just as much chance of passing away because of it as the next person with exactly the same conditions. It doesn't discriminate on the color of your skin. Now, that said, people of color and people from the BAME community have been passing away in larger numbers compared to other communities. And that's because of a lot of reasons. Now, in the UK, I can say that, access to healthcare isn't a major challenge. It is in another sense because those from BAME communities don't often present themselves to healthcare professionals as soon as sort of non-sort of BAME individuals and patients who present themselves to the hospital typically sooner, right? But there's also the aspect that a lot of our BAME community work in frontline activities like healthcare, security guards, taxi drivers, bus drivers. Most of those professions in the UK are actually occupied mostly by those from the BAME community. So they're also being discriminated in that sense. Now, that's a very different issue to sort of the more direct sort of form of discriminations. And when we talk about policies to deal with that, it's a very sort of sensitive subject. Now, I've probably worded what I've just said in an awful way. And I know someone listening will probably worry, oh my God, I can't believe what he's saying. But that's my point. This is a tough discussion. And if what I've just said to you find uncomfortable, well, that's exactly the space we need to be in. And that's
Yeah.
exactly the kind of thing you need to be educating me on a better way of thinking about that and saying that, and vice versa. You need to sort of listen to what I'm trying to say and try and see if there's a common ground, or maybe there's something that I don't know, or there's a fact I don't know, and sort of coming to the fore and saying, hey, listen, I hear you, but this isn't right. Here are the facts, rather than just sort of saying, oh, I'm wrong, you know?
Yeah, I mean, this movement can't be temporary, right? This is the
Right.
key thing. It can't be a temporary movement. It can't be a case that it's you what what you're saying is taken verbatim and used against you. It has to be
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
it has to be a case of let's translate and understand what the intention is, and have that conversation, because as we know, taking words and statements out of context does not
Yeah.
tell you anything in general at all. So as data people, we absolutely need to think of these things in terms of the wider field,
Yeah.
right?
My
So
only wish with that video is I'd made it ephemeral. I posted it on YouTube, so it's now there permanently. So if my view in 2 years changes or gets better or whatever, I've still got a permanent like view of what I thought. So I'm probably going to
I
update it
think
with
that's
comments
okay.
over time. Exactly, I'll update it with comments over time. I'll just add something in the description to say, hey, listen, okay, this view has changed and here's what it is, and if people take it. If they don't, that's fine. But I'm also not, you know, that's what I said and that's what I said, and I'd like to leave it there as a record of that,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
Yeah, completely. I think one of the other things that was I've talked about. I guess this is more of a specific topic within the Tableau community. Is
Right.
this topic isn't like everyone's scrambling to get data on coronavirus and COVID-19 and publish
Yeah.
their sort of take and their live tracker, as it were. The scramble to get information and find data around this topic was, I think, few and far between. I think partially due to
I'd go as far as saying virtually non-existent in the
it was
relative
silent. It was
sort of
very silent.
scheme of things. And you know, a couple of people made this comment to me actually in sort of private chats. You know, respect those people's privacy, so I won't share it, who they are here. But it's not it's just a view that was sort of commonly held, and I think there's two reasons, and I don't want this to be sort of a criticism of the community, because
No.
I think it's symptomatic of the wider problem we have.
I think it's part of that conversation piece, right? It's a
Yeah,
difficult conversation.
exactly,
You don't, and
exactly.
people don't feel. It's funny, right? People don't feel like they're entitled or have the knowledge to speak about
Right,
that, but then at the same
right.
time, aren't epidemiologists to talk about COVID-19, right?
Right, exactly, and it's that sort of space. For fear of doing something wrong, you're doing nothing. And again, I said this in my video. You know, silence is exactly where these things perpetuate, right? And there's not enough being done there. I think there's also this sort of dialogue about why is it always those from the BAME community who have to step up and represent themselves in this instance. And I think I agree with that to an extent. You know, I do agree. Yes, it's always sort of the responsibility of those in the BAME community to set up, you know, get on these panels and talk about the experiences, right? And the work is always sort of put on those who are maybe in the less fortunate position. But I'd also go as far as saying, well, there is an element of we do have to do that because we need to articulate what we experience, because it's not a common experience for most people. Yeah, we're in the minority in that sense. I say that even though there's a large amount of people who, you know, have experienced it. I really liked something that Channel 4 did. I'll put a link to it in the notes. When we used to have the Thursday clap for the NHS is a healthcare provider in the UK. Every Thursday at 8 p.m, we did this thing during coronavirus where we clapped the healthcare workers who were working there just 2 minutes before 8 o'clock. I think at 8 o'clock for 2 minutes. What Channel 4 have done is immediately after the news, they've actually inserted this 5-minute segment, and they did it for 3 days, where they took 4 people from the BAME community of different social classes. So they had an actor, they had a middle-class professional, they had someone just a working class individual, and then they had someone, one other sort of professional. Anyway, they had really good spread of people. And for 5 minutes, for 1 minute each, and they cut it into sort of 10-minute segments, they each talked about their first time they experienced racism. Okay. And it was very, very good because it just showed you all of them were talking about experience throughout their lives. So one person experienced it when they were 5 and they remembered it to this day. They're now getting sort of treatment for it, in terms of mental health treatment for it, because it's something that's actually perpetuated to their life. Another one was an actor who at 18 got into RADA, was performing really well, and people were making jokes on the side. Another one was a 10-year-old kid who's now an adult, you know, in their 30s and 35, talking about it for the first time since the Channel 4. And it was really beautiful because they were going all the way. They were using the N-word all the way through. I won't say that on the podcast because Apple will hunt me down. Maybe that's a discussion we need to have, and it was a really sort of powerful piece because they were talking raw about the topic. It made you feel uncomfortable just listening to it. It made you want to do something. And I mean, I watched it and I looked at Brie and, she was looking at me, and it sort of fostered that exact response. We're kind of looking at each other like, are you hearing this? And it's great to hear that because that is a sort of, that is the extent of what's happening. And it's not happening in small instances. And people are finally getting the courage to talk about it, just like in any other scenario. Yeah.
I think that the powerful thing there is almost everyone of a BAME background can point to that first time.
Yeah.
Right. Where they experience some level of racial bias or racism,
Yeah.
and it does affect you, right? It does affect you in a way that you don't expect, and there's almost a lag as well when you're growing up because you don't realize it until you're a bit older, and then like, damn, that was not okay from whatever happened, and that's where it starts to affect you. And there are different conversations that happen in households where people are of a minority, right? Conversations and things that other communities can't fathom. So
yeah, exactly. Experiencing racism as being part of the fabric of people's life. That's literally the channel for quote from an individual they spoke to, actor David Harewood, and it's a really interesting sort of thought exercise I think everyone needs to do. They need to set their own context, but also more broadly, I think it's a context we need to bring to organizations. I think people ask, well, how do I know if my company's doing the right thing or not? How do I know if the company's on the right track? What I tend to say on this, and I've said this sort of loosely, as someone who's not a professional at this, who doesn't have any experience of this, what I'd say is, listen, if your company is struggling with other diversity issues, like gender diversity or, people sort of struggling
LGBTQ,
to LGBT, to express them, their sexual preferences, really struggling to come out with those kind of things. Or maybe you have really poor sort of levels of sort of diversity in certain aspects of your company, whether it's through hiring, and you're openly aware of those issues. Maybe gender diversity as an example is an issue. Well, the likelihood is that those challenges in diversity are probably also relevant in this BAME topic. Yeah. And in the same way that you sort of passionately look at those issues, you have to ask yourself, why have you not looked at the issue of Black and minority ethnic individuals and how they're represented in your organization? Because just as much as those issues have been on a journey for the last, I think, decade, if I'm brutally honest, in sort of broad society, well, that decade is a decade that hasn't really been experienced in some cases, and every company is in a different place. I say this from the information lab perspective. I think we're in a good place in some of those other areas. We're not perfect, but we're definitely everyone sector of the trend. Yeah.
Yeah, and everyone can do better. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And we can always do better. And that's the thing. You have to know where you're starting from to know where you have challenges. And so if you're still tackling gender diversity or, sexual preferences in your organization, then this is likely an issue that you're probably not even aware you have, right? Because ironically, this isn't in terms of the order of sort of challenges that companies take. It tends to go in that order, right?
Yeah, and that's an interesting one. And I've always been I think statements that often boil my blood and sort of get me going and really irritated are when people start to rank diversity, right? Like, as in, if you can't get this diversity right, what's the point of even bothering with the rest? Like, well, no, surely you should be thinking about all of them, and it's such a different discussion, and all of these things should be on the same level. And of course, some may seem more prevalent and more important, but having all of these in discussion is important. But as we've mentioned, the Black Lives Matter and the BAME discussion is one that should continue. I don't think it should stop, and I don't think it should be sort of separated as an anomaly, because it should be part of every conversation. And as I said, as we've mentioned through this thing, I think we really want to make sure that, and we encourage space to have this conversation. So
exactly.
Yeah,
that's a really deep topic. I think I'll apologize up front if we've made anyone uncomfortable or unhappy about what we've said. But what I'd encourage you to do is to reach out and talk to us. I think lots of people have reached out and talked to both of us. We've both been involved in discussion offline to entirely different groups of people. This is the first time you and me are talking about it, right? I mean, we've talked on WhatsApp and stuff like that. But It's the
talking
first time we're
openly
having a
about it is
discussion
different.
openly about it, right?
Yeah, and I
And
think that a lot of this is ad lib, and this we've not we've not got a script or any
ad lib.
idea of
A lot of
where
this
this
is
is
ad lib.
going.
Ravi, the whole entire show is ad lib. Come on.
Right,
There's no
exactly.
script
So
in front of us right now.
there's no script, there's no structure. So of course there
Come
are
on,
going to be sort
get
of,
with the show. Jesus.
as we mentioned about the language point, like the language we speak is important, and of course we may have made some discretion, but
Right.
we're always open to have that conversation. I think that's what
Right.
we'd encourage. So
Yeah.
if you do have things to share or things you'd like to talk about, please do reach out and
Please do.
get in touch with us. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And so yeah, I think I just want to finish on this point of the video I shared. I shared a video because guess what? Video is something I'm really passionate about.
Right.
So I actually wrote. I said in the video I wrote it all down, and then I thought, there's no way I'm posting this anyway because who the hell is going to read 5 sides of A4 written by someone who's never written anything in the public context. And the platform I do know a lot about and I can communicate well in, I think, is video. So
Right.
I literally took what I wrote and I said, okay, how do I make this a video? I changed the structure, I changed the order, and then I just sat and talked to the camera for what I thought would be 15 minutes. It ended up being half an hour. I didn't edit it. I just thought, this is too much work to edit it out. And you can tell when something is edited and polished. I didn't want it to be that. So I just said it and I was done.
It came across very authentic, right? And I think that was the sort of message you went for.
Yeah. And so, listen, if you don't feel comfortable doing a video, that's also fine. I didn't do a video because I'm saying everyone should do a video. I also don't think everyone should be public about it. If they've gone through a traumatic,
it's a very personal thing.
Yeah, it's totally up to the individual. And so I didn't do it as to set an example of what people should be doing. I think some people took it as that. However, what I'd say is, listen, talk to someone, whether it's just your fiance, your wife, your husband, your friend, your best friend. Talk to someone about it, because the issue is when we keep it sort of to ourselves, when we don't share it to at least one other person, we don't get an opportunity to vent. And venting is actually quite an important part of sort of forming your thoughts and your structures on these views into a constructive manner. It's also a good way of being challenged on that perspective. And lastly, I think it gives you a little bit of a sort of a testing ground, so that when you do have to talk about it to someone else, you've already talked about it and it's not a painful experience the first time round. And normally the first person you talk to, who you approach, will probably be understanding, because you'll trust them to be that person that understands and can sort of guide you through how to articulate yourself. So just the simple act of talking to someone, whether it's one individual or your family or even a larger group, that's all I was sort of trying to sort of highlight in the video. And I was talking to the community broadly. But that's just because I naturally felt comfortable doing that. I've done that discussion before, with peers or to myself, or in reflective thought.
Right, exactly.
Boom.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you mentioned video, right? Because there's been to sort of close off that problem, move on to a next one. It's been a sort of rise in video content. I think we've seen sort of
yes.
we're talking about the data viz and especially, of course, the Tableau community, which we're both part of. Neomorphism had its month in the spotlight. Everyone's got their modern dashboard template ready to go.
Clean design. Oh, don't
clean
get me
design.
started. Don't get me started on clean design.
But now the pivot to video has started in the world of data viz. Like I remember in the sports analytics world and the journalism world, pivot to video was a huge thing about 3 years ago. Everyone's pivoting to video. Video is the optimal way to consume content. Everyone's watching videos, 2 to 3 minute videos. That's what you want to do. And the Tableau blogging community is now caught on as well. So
I actually think this coronavirus sort of pandemic has pushed people to explore new platforms, right? Because
absolutely,
what were we doing before already? Blogs, and everyone was already reading them. Okay, and what you found yourself is sitting on Zoom, getting more comfortable, just literally talking to someone on a screen.
I think that's it.
That literally
you're comfortable looking at yourself. You're comfortable talking to randoms.
Yeah, exactly. And I know this as someone who's watched himself on videos countless times. The big hurdle is getting over that initial thing, and actually having done that in Zoom 100 times, having the video of yourself in the top right hand corner, and you kind of stop looking at it and you don't feel so bad. You've gotten over the digital hurdle, as it were, and now all of a sudden, wow, it's as easy as just doing the same thing, but this time you hit record and you get to see what it looks like before you share it out. So why not, right? And I think it's absolutely fantastic for so many reasons. Accessibility. I said accessibility twice there. I meant it in two different forms. Accessibility in terms of a different way of people thinking. Accessibility in the sense that some people struggle to read. I myself have mild dyslexia, so I
I mean,
really struggle to read the
there's
long
also
blog
English.
posts.
There's also English. People that have English as a second language, right?
Yes, yes,
People that are, you're able to
yes,
bring in and pause, and with video, you're able to show people what you're doing,
yeah. My
and that visual transcends language, right?
my second biggest audience on YouTube is India. After United States, it's India, and by a very close margin.
Yep.
And it's two reasons. Okay, English is a commonly spoken language, but I tell you what, the transcription on YouTube is unbelievable to the
Yeah, I think
point
we've
where
talked about this in the past, right?
I would comfortably let Google translate my videos into any language and tell people to use that as a transcript of my video. I literally download the transcript of my YouTube videos and I keep a text copy as a transcript on my computer so I can search my videos. That's how I search topics. I download the transcript, I save the text note, that when I search on my little folder of video content, I can see all the videos that have referenced a particular topic. That's literally how I work, right? And it's that good. And okay, it's not the Tower of Babel level, no, but it's definitely enough for someone to watch that and get the sentiment, especially with Tableau, where you're actually going through something on the screen and you're showing them. They don't necessarily need to understand everything, so it gives you a much wider audience you can reach as well.
Think about like the most successful. Starting in our community, Andy Kribble's tip videos have been watched countless numbers of times, right? Because they're easy to follow. Andy doesn't edit. Andy doesn't edit them because he wants people to see that he also makes mistakes, which is, I think, a great exercise.
Yeah, exactly.
Moving forward, you've got Khan Academy. You've got the entire plethora of YouTube videos of people. Udemy, right? Yeah. All of these things are consuming through video for a reason. LinkedIn
right? Learning.
Yeah.
Lynda.com, which is now LinkedIn Learning. If you've got LinkedIn Premium, you get LinkedIn Learning free.
Yeah.
It's an incredible platform.
So it's I think it's good because you want those multimedia platforms, right? Like as you mentioned, you I mean, we've talked about it before. I like reading your blogs, but you absolutely hate writing them, right? So video is a great medium for you to be able to first collect your thoughts and then show people what you're doing. So I think it's an interesting trend. I think people, it's a lot of fun. I think I've recorded a few videos when I was at the Information Lab through like tutorials and how-tos. I've not done one actually in my channel. I went back and looked. Everything's been wiped with my Information Lab Google account being destroyed. So it's okay. It's a clean state for me to start on.
You're dead to us. I told you. You're dead to us.
So I think it's an interesting thing, and as I said, as long as you've got many people interacting with this content, it's only a good thing. This is why podcasts, the written word, public speaking, all of these things are important. Books. I mean, everyone's writing a book these days. There's another one as a good reference point for a lot of people. It's an interesting time ahead. Like I think lockdown has got people thinking about the ways to share their content and their views. So I'm looking forward to consuming that content.
Yeah, exactly. And all I can say is, listen, if you want help with YouTube, anything, reach out to me. Literally, video. The thing about video people is we love sharing information because the thing is that the content is all unique. Like if you do a video, Ravi, about something and I do a video on the exact same topic, guess what? We'll appeal to two entirely different audiences.
Right. Some people might hate your voice.
Yes, exactly. Some people might hate your voice, they might hate your style, but they'll love another person's voice and style. And YouTube gives them that choice. YouTube algorithm just loves shoving stuff in front of your face. So the more we can get more people out there in the Tableau community making videos about the same thing, the more people are bound to find the product of Tableau and love it and get involved and join our community. And that is the most, just simply put, the most important thing. Yep. And dare I say it, I think YouTube and many other platforms actually have more power to make our community more inclusive because by their nature, they reach a much broader audience and have a very, very sort of good track record of reaching wider audiences, whether it's the people who consume them or the people who make the content. Just take a simple look at YouTube creators as an example, right? They are a very diverse crowd of people. Okay, they might all come from the same countries like Canada and America and so on and so forth, but they are a diverse group of people. Take the top 100 YouTube creators. They're a naturally diverse group of people because, surprise, surprise, they're not discriminated based on their background. They're discriminated based on the quality of their content. And it's such a perfect synonymous sort of translation of what we need to happen in the tablet community. Not that it doesn't happen already, but if you want to go to a community where that is already happening,
you want more voices. You want diversity of thought.
Yeah.
You want diversity of opinion. This is how you foster a really healthy community. So
and frankly put, you also get to see a face behind the content,
Yep.
which you'd argue Twitter doesn't actually let you do, because you just put out lots of vizzes. You might see the little profile icon. That profile icon is just a static photo. It's just a static sort of piece of content. When you start to hear someone's voice, you start to see them on video, you start to connect with them in more ways than just a photo. Okay, you start to understand who they are fundamentally as an individual, and I think that's also another really valuable connection sort of this words building. Regardless of the inclusivity of the sort of diversity points. So I'm really passionate about video, probably more so as you've just figured out. And I think the more people we can get behind it, reach out, ask for help. There's hundreds of places and hundreds of free resources. You can do it as a GIF, all the way to really high-end produced stuff, even better than what you find on, Plural Site or whatever. You can do it at any level you want.
Shoots in red, right? Like
so accessible. It's so accessible. It's unbelievable. You can even do it on your phone, for goodness sake. Your phone can edit YouTube videos. It's honestly that easy in today's world. So reach out, ask for help. We'll find a way to get you online.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, this has been a bumper podcast, right? Like I think we're gonna call this the unplugged one, given that there's been
the unplugged. Yes.
I mean, we try to keep to the rough structure normally.
Yes. And I'm running on Coke here, as you can see, Ravi. So
the Coca-Cola to listeners who can't see him
Coke
gesturing.
Coke the drink. Yeah.
Yeah. Towards the red can.
I can ping the. There you go.
There you go. So it's real.
That's a real thing.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, just before we finish, I think congratulations are in order, Tim. There's a new addition to the Nguyen family on the way.
Yeah, not just yet. In November, on the way. Super, super happy. Obviously, I've known for a while. I've kept it to myself for a bunch of reasons, obviously. But yeah, with 3 months to go, it's felt like the right time to share. So yeah, super happy. Shared it with the community. Shared it in a bunch of places. Yeah, in case you don't see me or you don't see videos from me for 6 months from November, you know why.
Because you'll be sleeping every chance you get.
I'll be asleep.
Yeah.
I'll be asleep or hiding in a corner, one of the two.
Well, one thing I was thinking actually just before this podcast is we started the year, we're halfway through the year. I think we've done about, this is episode 8, so we've done 8 podcasts this year. Now what's interesting... This season, sorry, yeah. So, this season, we started the year talking about, like, in a year's time, this could be a very different podcast. For completely different reasons, right? The reasons we talked about
in every sense.
Yeah, with the reasons we talked about were not like at all what's happened so far this year.
Yeah. Wow.
However, however, yes, it's absolutely true. This time next, January next year is going to be a very different podcast. Who knows where we'll be and the world we'll be living in? But it's
Jeez, yeah. Won't be colleagues. I'll be a father.
Yep.
So many things.
So many things. So let's see what happens. It's been a good year so far. In some ways, tricky in some others.
Yeah.
But hopefully, I mean, we're going to try and loop this back up again, the podcast. So do send in any suggestions for topics.
We should do a year in review. Actually, we should take our beginning episode, take all our predictions, and sort of see how they played out.
Yeah, I wonder if we did make any predictions. But we definitely should at the end of this season.
We've made a few loose ones. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's definitely do that. But thank you for listening. I think what as I said, please do send in any suggestions for topics or any comments or feedback on this episode. We'll be getting back into the swing of things over the next couple of months. So hopefully you'll have a few more bits of content in your podcast, just as long as Tim remembers to upload them.
Hey. I'm on the case. Jeez. Oh my gosh.
No, it's
all right.
good.
Are we done yet? Can I get off this microphone? Can I hang up on you more to the point?
I think that's a podcast. Take care, everyone, and hopefully see you in a couple of weeks' time.